So we're here this morning to talk about Russia, a country with 142 million people, which will soon become the largest internet market in Europe. Today it's number 2 behind Germany. It's expected to rapidly catch up. So just a couple of brief flashpoints on the Russian internet market. Russians are among the most active users of social networks in the world. Once they get on, they stay on longer than other people. Might have something to do with those long nights in Siberia. They have a very vibrant blogosphere and an incredible mobile penetration of 132%. And if you're wondering how they could have 132% mobile penetration, we only have to look at one of our panelists, Sasha, Galitsky, who himself carries 4 phones. Now, the interesting thing about the Russian market is that the big players domestically are all Russian. The American players like Google and Facebook trail way behind the local players. And this is not, there are some very good reasons for that we'll get into on the panel, and one of them is the strength of their technology. So I'd like to start the panel. We're lucky today, I have to mention that we really have Russia's rock stars in the internet world up here on the panel. And I'd like to start with Arkady Volozh from Yandex, which is the largest search engine portal in Russia. If we could have the first slide ready, please. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yes, we represent this faraway country, a little bit unusual in comparison to Europe, a different landscape. Yandex is one of the largest portals in Russia and the largest search engine by far. We dominate the search market with almost 60% market share. And Russia, in this respect, Russia is just a few markets in the world where American players are non-dominant. It's Russia, China, Korea, and Czech Republic, and just a few other markets. And what's important for us that this market share doesn't, we don't lose it, despite the fact that Google is very active on our market. We still retain this market share for years. What's important, we retain this market. This first graph here looks like flat, but in fact, it's flat on a very fast-growing audience. Market, in terms of audience, market is growing 25–30% a year. Last year it was, this year, 2009, it was almost 40 million users, which makes us the second largest European market. And I think we're going to outgrow Germany, which is number 1 currently. So on this growing market, we still retain this market share, and it brings material results, of course. We reached more than 300 million in revenues last year, in 2008, before the crisis. This year we didn't lose almost. We grew in local currency, in rubles. And this is despite the fact that the whole advertising market, unfortunately, during the crisis dropped tens of percent, 20–30% at least. And we retain this market share mostly because we have people to run our technologies. Russia has historically a very strong mathematical school, which actually powers what looks like just a simple search string on Yandex. There's thousands of good engineers behind it, and that's basically why we as a technology company still not only survive, but dominate on the market.
So, Arkady, I think it's worth mentioning that your company actually started in search on the internet before Google did. And you, although people refer to Yandex as the Google of Russia, you like to refer to Google as the Yandex for the rest of the world.
It's a joke, yes. yes, Russia has its own culture of technological development, and Russia used to have its own search engines in the mids of the 90s. We started doing search before the internet appeared. We searched in patent information in classical literature archives. When internet appeared, there was several Russian search engines. One was called Rambler, another was called Upward. There was several other players. We appeared on the market only in 1997, which was a couple of years, a year after Rambler, a couple of years after the rest. So it was, yes, it was before Google appeared on US market, but it was Alta Vista, InfoSeek time, those times.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to turn now to Bernard Lukey from Ozone, which is sometimes referred to as the Amazon of Russia, since Amazon's not present at all. So tell us a little bit about building this e-commerce company in Russia.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Indeed, Americans compare ourselves to the Amazon of Russia. People living in Brazil would say we are the Submarinos of Russia. We started, Ozone was launched in '98, and actually the idea to launch Ozone came when a software development company in St. Petersburg called Rexsoft saw the press release of Amazon and decided that this was a great idea and they wanted to launch something similar. The company started selling books online and added product lines the same way all the major players like Amazon do it regularly. Today, we sell over 500,000 product assortment, which we have in our own stocks, and have just started a merchant platform, which allows us to integrate and aggregate other e-commerce players in the country. We have also recently launched an interesting venture in the e-travel business, which is totally underdeveloped yet in Russia, which we believe can become quite big, and we don't see any serious contender there yet. So I think we are at the very early stage of this e-commerce market in the country, and we want to take position in the most interesting and promising areas. So
today you only have something like, what, 8 or 9% of the population actually buying things online?
It's actually less than that. It's 9% of internet users that buy online. And when you think about it, it's about 30 to 35% of the population who uses internet. That brings this percentage down to, less than 3 on the total population. So we believe e-commerce is yet at a very, very early stage. And our biggest challenge is to make sure we convert people to e-commerce much faster. And there I need to mention, just to show you why I've added 2 interesting pictures at the bottom of these slides. There are 2 main specificities in this country which affect all the e-commerce players. The first one is that because the Russian Post is operating slowly and does not do next day delivery, we had to set up, and most of our contenders had to set up their own courier companies. So actually, we have now almost 250 people working in Ozone as couriers, bringing and delivering orders in Moscow and St. Pete only. And in the other regions, we work with local courier partners. This adds a lot of complexity and a lot of headcounts. The other specificity, which is also related to that, is that above 80% of the orders we get are paid cash on delivery. That means credit card and prepaid card usage is extremely low in Russia, which creates an additional complexity of having to handle a lot of cash. And changes your cash cycle a little bit, because you only get cash after you deliver the order and the customer has accepted it. You see in the last pictures that our couriers actually walk around with these mobile cash machines to print out the check at the customers when they get the goods. So we heard Tony before talking about customer service. I don't think yet we are at Zappos level, but I think we can, we're trying to imitate them. And it's a little bit more complex in Russia than in other countries. Okay,
thank you, Bernard. Now I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Edward Shenderovich. Now, Edward, you were a co-founder of Soup, which owns, among other things, LiveJournal, and is running basically the blogosphere in Russia, right? So can you tell us a little bit about the blogosphere?
Sure. did indeed was one of the was indeed one of the founding people at Soup, now running a venture fund. But as far as the blogosphere in Russia, it's a very unique phenomenon. The blogosphere is primarily one platform, which is LiveJournal, and it's not just a matter of a platform, as with Typepad or other blogging platforms. It's also a community, and the blogosphere in Russia is not as professional as it is in the West. It's certainly more about kitchen conversations. The blogging is not verticalized, so you can rarely find blogs on specific topics like politics or economy. Mainly, it's people writing about their own impressions, and you see a lot of journalists using LiveJournal in Russia. A lot of politicians actually. Dmitry Medvedev, who's the Russian president, opened a blog on LiveJournal, which caused a lot of other government officials to do the same.
Right, and you've told me in conversations that there's really no censorship. It's not that there's not the same kind of issues as in China. Is that correct?
Well, because the platform is open and because LiveJournal continues to be an American company, there cannot be any censorship. And it's, in general, it's very hard to censor the blogosphere unless you simply cut off access. And Russia has not invested in the same technologies that China has, and as far as we can tell, doesn't plan to have any censorship online.
Okay, great. Let me turn now to last but certainly not least, Sasha Galitsky, who for many is really one of the rocks, the kind of, I don't know if you could say father of the Russian tech industry, but for those of you who don't know him, Sasha started out his career working on the Russia Star Wars program. He pioneered Wi-Fi and VPN. He went on to found 5 companies. 2 of them have had exits, and now he's the co-founder of a new $100 million fund based out of Moscow. So, Sasha, tell us, I mean, we are seeing more Western VCs flowing into Russia. Index invested $18 million into Ozone. Cisco Venture Fund is active. Intel, Insight. But there are still some concerns on the part of Western VCs about, how safe is it to invest in Russia? How do you structure a company to attract Western VC and, prepare for an eventual exit on a Western exchange?
Yeah, I will answer on your question, but first I will back for one very important stuff which I like for a long time. I like that one joke, which usually very close to life. American invent something, Asian organize mass production, Russian speaking about priority, and Europeans speak about lost opportunity. So it is typical situation which we can find on the market space. As for Russian companies right now, today, it is, Russian companies started to attract investment. It is both sides. One, companies which are going global, since today exist only political borders. Money is fluent, resources accessible, and capital from this reason also accessible. Point is that how to protect IP, how to do many stuff which related to the more better governance. Usually we have 2 types of companies which targeted local market and companies which are targeting global market. From global perspective, all companies usually go overseas and establish companies in the US or possibly sometimes in some island or sometime in Europe. And from this point of view, I will name these companies as a company which name developed in Russia, but made somewhere else. So you can find such as companies like Parallels, Acronis, leading companies and well known on the West, but they still count as Russian by some way, and by Western world they are looking as Western companies.
Evernote also in Silicon Valley.
Yes, so Evernote, you can count many companies. It was interesting with one VC we found that a company which in PBX virtual world, one of the leading companies in the world, they have 200 employees working for them in Russia. UNVC invested money, they didn't know what is going on in company. It is how company is structured. Yeah? So it is how to avoid and attract people to get money and to be and go on ahead. Some venture fund becoming very active in Russia right now. We created fund as with two offices in Silicon Valley and in Russia to attract not only Russian guys or Russian speaking guys who are working and living in Russia, but also abroad. Mm-hmm. And it is one way, since many guys again moving back to Silicon Valley to find their way, as a French guys or German guys moving over there as well. As for internet, it is booming again, and people started to understand the number of users in internet, what Arkady presented, that it is big opportunity to make money. And many Western guys, including, again, French, Sofinova, or some other guys, they see the opportunity for their mobile companies, for, let's say, internet mobile companies, big opportunity in Russia, since it is pretty big mobile market over there. Mm-hmm. So it is, but again, how to structure company, it is all Western VC would like to see that will be built outside of Russia with 100% owned Russian subsidiary.
Yeah, now you and I have talked about how, and I'll ask all the panelists to jump in on this, that, you know, there's a need for role models in the market. There's a need to kind of be able to point to successful technology entrepreneurs, internet entrepreneurs, but at the same time, culturally and for other reasons, a number of Russian companies like to keep their success quiet. They like to keep their roots quiet. So how do you get around that problem? Because you want to encourage more entrepreneurs, but at the same time, they don't see enough successful role models. Okay, do you want to take it?
Maybe not seeing them in the Western press, but in Russia, all of the local heroes are very well known and act as good examples for the startups. So we have kind of a closed market because we have our own language, which has enough critical mass to have its own culture. And in this culture, what's going on in this culture, it looks like going on behind the walls from here. But it does goes on there. We have enough startups, maybe not enough covered in our press. Ironically, so all the startups all the heroes are well known locally. But if you look at the local press, ironically, you'll see more mentions of foreign companies than you see of Russian companies, just because I explained to myself this is because to translate foreign language is cheaper than to create your own text. And Russian media just translate US and European media, and that's why the number of mentions of Yahoo, for example, which has no market in Russia at all, less than 1%, it's more than mentions of Yandex.
Well, it's because Russians always want to compare themselves. The Russian market always wants to compare itself to the US market. That's its role model. And as far as heroes, and Arkady is the hero that should be in the newspapers as the person that built the most successful Russian internet company. And instead, we're seeing people as role models, seeing people that are making money from natural resources. So it's this is a situation that needs to be corrected from the top.
Yeah. For Russia, Gazprom is a serious company, whereas Yandex is a small company. In US, Google is large enough to be covered in the mainland press.
Well, that brings me to another issue, and that is that the Russian government has said publicly that it wants to move away from dependence on natural resources. So it's talking the talk, but is it walking the walk? Is it doing what it needs to do to encourage entrepreneurship in Russia?
Well, 2 months ago, Dmitry Medvedev wrote a speech in which he said that we need to move away from natural resources, we need to modernize the economy, and within these 2 months, different governors, mayors of cities announced similar initiatives. But I'm afraid that this will just die down in the next year. It will not be priority. Getting people heat in the winter will be bigger priority than modernizing the economy. And if the government wants to do something about this and wants to get away from dependence on natural resources, it needs to be, in Russia, it needs to be pounded into people's heads from the top, into the heads of governors and mayors of cities and large companies that they need to innovate, otherwise the economy will crumble.
Although I can say, I mean, it has given a push. The current president's attention to internet has given a strong push amongst all the administration to integrate internet as a tool. For example, we have our central warehouse in a small city called Tver, which is between Moscow and St. Pete. And I was amazed how well this has been adopted there and how much Tver and the administration, the local administration, is actually using the internet to communicate outside and the intranet to communicate between themselves. So it is actually happening. But coming back to your question about the local heroes, we discussed it backstage. I think those who are interested in meeting them should join us at the annual Russian Internet Forum, which happens every year somewhere in April, which also became a huge event, not as well organized as here, I have to say. We are looking at this and having good ideas how to improve it. But there are 5,000 people participating in this Russian Internet Forum, and a lot of the granular activity which is happening in the internet pops up during these discussions. So, you know, we have already invited Loic. I think I extend the invitation to all of you if you want to know what's actually going on in the Russian internet, which you will never hear when you're here, actually.
Okay, great. Sasha, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I will add that, of course, some changing going in Russia in comparison to 90s, where everybody tried to sell technology like I did, and to develop. We didn't know how to build market company, actually. Right now, I see a lot of entrepreneurs who are doing and know how to do it since they're reading books. they have a lot of connections. So today it's easy to build everything. And I will not say, and I don't see the role of government as a major in this direction. Government started to follow this direction, and I don't see that it is very important that government will boost or help to build entrepreneurship. Important that they will create at least atmosphere which will be good for Russia. So from this point of view, they are doing these steps. They created some initiatives which can help and to turn some young generation to the right direction. I not expect that guys 40 plus or later will turn immediately from oil fields to build internet companies. But the guys who are in 20s, they see that it is possible. And I know many examples of young kids sitting in, let's say, in the middle of Russia, like Volozh, building social games, and they grew from, I don't know, a few years ago, 2 years ago, there was only like $800,000 sales. Today, this year, they closed in $6 million sales. And it is two brothers who even looking around for talents over the Russia and move 40 families to this small city, Volozh, from other places to develop games. So it is a good turn.
So beyond games, can we talk about some of the cool companies, the cool applications that are bubbling up in Russia? I mean, you, Sasha, and are investing in companies, Edward, as well. Can you talk to us about some of the things you're seeing on the market?
Well, I'm seeing two types of entrepreneurs. There are entrepreneurs that want to go global, that actually have some global ideas and want to build companies that would be based in Russia, but would have users all over the world. And I'm talking about the consumer internet. And then there are specific, because the Russian market is large enough, and because it isn't, there's the concept of a national internet called RUNET. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that want to build companies that work in RUNET only. And the second kind is actually a lot more limited. I mean, entrepreneurs in generally, in many cases, think about very narrow ideas. Here, they're thinking about very narrow ideas in a very specific market. But there's some, at the same time, there are some very cool companies that are appearing. As Bernard said, the e-commerce world is just in its infancy, and there are new business models that are being experimented on. There are companies also in the technology platforms that are popping up. So there are some very interesting things that are happening both from the Russian perspective and from the global perspective. Because with the market in which you can test things and test things very quickly, there's a possibility of companies jumping into other markets. And I think that's the leadership that Yandex and other companies need to provide, where larger Russian companies go abroad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of a very specific Russian-oriented application online. All the good applications, they come from real-life troubles. Moscow is very well known for its traffic jams. So 3 years ago, we've launched a project which is now copied elsewhere in the world as we see it. So the project is very simple. We started to show the simple traffic jams information online on the desktops as well as to the mobile client. And people started downloading that mobile client. 10% of the mobile phones are GPS enabled. And those units, mobile phones, started sending us back the GPS tracks. And today we have, of course, we process those GPS tracks, and we now can tell where the traffic jam is. Just we see the speed of the move. And people are downloading, the more applications they download, the more information we have. It's like Web 2.0 for mobile devices, not for people, for devices. And this is, we now cover dozens of different Russian, Ukrainian cities with this application. And it's one of the most used mobile application in Russia. And I think we have more than 10% of mobile usage versus desktop. For any application, I think it's kind of a record.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Sasha?
as for specific applications, it is, I will say, I know almost 4 dozen companies in Russia which doing between $4 to $20 million revenue from Western markets. And the point for these companies, they don't know how to make the next step, since they're all operation going from Russia, and usually they use digital river to sell their application and software. So we believe that model which we try with my partner, who is a partner in the fund, with Acronis and Parallels. When Acronis was in 2004 just $5 million company, now almost $200 million. And Parallels was 3 or 2.5 million, and right now $100 million in 4 years. So it is a model since many companies bootstrap in Russia. And they're achieving this revenue without any investment from any VC, usually. So the way to turn them and to make them more successful, it is a one way. And specific application, I will say, we invested recently in Acumatica, for example. It is web ERP company for cloud computing, since we very move into the cloud computing investment pretty heavily. This company only one who presented real application for Azure recently on Microsoft event, since even Microsoft did not have any application to run on Azure. So this software started to compete with their internal division, but Microsoft need to show something. So it is like this specific application coming directly from Russia. So when guys told about internet, they know about internet more than I can say.
But would you consider that a Russian company? It has Western management.
I told you, no, come on. All these companies which I made and spoke about moving from few millions to 200 usually run by Russians. As I told, they don't know the way to move to the next step. Yeah, we change management, we get in management, and it is what need to have Russia to move companies to the next step, since it is no big experience in Russian managers right now. But the point how to consider, I told in my speech, we need to move from what it is. I started for a joke. Develop in Russia, produced somewhere. it is a big change and trend. Today, as I told, Armani developed in Italy, but produced in China. What's the point? And the main point, who invents and who delivers a new property of intellectual property and how to produce in market, it has become a little bit different challenge.
Okay.
Actually, in this respect, we are very much like China in industrial manufacturing. They manufacture everything for the whole world, and the local market is fed only by the Chinese enterprises. In the Russian internet, we have the high-tech industry. We have similar situation, and a lot of Russian companies back up a lot of international technology companies, and the local market is dominated by local players.
So tell me, given all of this potential, are we going to see some big exits on Western stock markets from Russian companies? And I'm going to start with you, Arkady, because there were a lot of rumors about Yandex going public on the New York Exchange. So I want to talk to you about what happened with that and how you have structured your company.
Yes, it's not a secret. We were almost on NASDAQ last year, and what happened is just one word: crisis. We were about to go public in October.
Okay.
Last October. So as of now, we still consider it as one of the options to go to NASDAQ or elsewhere. We need our market to regain again, and we need the worldwide capital markets to regain. And
sure.
Then we will return to consideration of whether or not to go public again.
Last question. You like other big media companies, there's issues about ownership. So how do you, with the government, how do you get around that?
Okay. So what we have, what we arrange with the government is we now have, we had our corporate finance structure, which was dual-class stock, just like Google and other companies do. In addition to that, we've implemented the golden share concept. This is something what I think Volkswagen or Rolls-Royce have. We have the Russian Sberbank, the government bank, which holds one share of Yandex, which gives them only one right. They have a right to veto any consolidation of more than 25% of Yandex in anyone's hands. And it's completely fits our interests. We also don't want anybody to consolidate a lot of interest in Yandex in one hands. So this is the only right the Sberbank has, and it protects, just like on other markets, other medias on other markets, they have their own protection mechanisms. Nobody can come and buy Baidu or Google, and this is the way how you cannot buy Yandex as a whole. You can buy share in Yandex, but not Yandex as a company.
Okay, with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Stay tuned. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about Russia in the near future. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much to our Russia panel.